Some research methods in cognitive psychology. For instance, experiments. In an experiment, one variable is manipulated, the independent variable. The other's measured, the dependent variable. Let's take that Stroop case from a minute ago. Whether in the Stroop case, whether the font matched the word was the independent variable, and reaction time naming the font color is a dependent variable. Now, back in the day, Stroop used a stopwatch. We use computers now. But I can manipulate whether the blue matches the font or the word, and I can measure how fast it takes someone to make a response with respect to the color. And that's a classic experiment. If I were comparing, let's say, men and women on something, gender is not manipulated. It already exists. Now, in past parlance, we use the idea of two genders. I do understand that that is out of favor now, but taking that simplistic viewpoint, we would say just from the binary sense, as may have been listed in the past, that men and women constitute a quasi-independent variable. In other words, they already exist, and therefore I have trouble inferring cause. So, for instance, this Atlantic Magazine article on the bottom right suggests that men come into situations with more confidence. So, a contrast in designs, if you'll indulge. There are between participants design, we say participants now, where different experimental participants are assigned to different conditions, and the researcher looks for differences in performance between the groups. So if I had people performing some puzzle in 65-degree conditions versus 95, and everybody does just one thing, that's a between participants design. In contrast, a within design exposes the same participants to more than one condition. They might perform several memory tasks but receive different instructions for each task. This Stroop test, I flew through all these. That was within participants. I got both blue matching blue and then the blue font saying red. I got both conditions. That's within if I have both. But on the other hand, if someone does just one condition, it's between participants. Naturalistic observation. The researchers try to be unobtrusive so that behavior is natural, of course. For instance, these scientists are watching through one-way glass. Pardon me. Some toddlers. Excuse me, I was coughing there. Now, the idea is that they're playing or they're having conversations, we want to stay out of their way and not bother them, not influence their behavior, of course. Now, this can have some ecological validity. This is preserved if the organisms are in their natural habitat and perform naturally. So think of Goodall's. But here's another person that's still alive. I think she's roughly 92. Think of her chimpanzees observed in the wild. Now, she's kind of close to him right there, but there were many contexts in which she did stay a good number of yards away to allow them to be observed. And if you ever go, some of these, this research is 55 years old now, dates to the, 67, 68, 69. And they made documentaries about it, and it is wrenching. My gosh, these chimpanzees, not just their apparent intelligence, but their apparent malevolence. Whereas adult chimps killed the offspring of rival bands of chimps, they had the equivalent of domestic violence. Oh my gosh. I wouldn't go near a chimpanzee for $1 million. They have a strong malevolent streak to them, but she was among the first people to observe that. And oh, by the way, the chimpanzees have a first cousin called the bonobos that live in the same region that don't have any of those traits. They're very docile. It's kind of interesting. But through ecologically valid naturalistic observations, she was able to observe those things. Now, there are disadvantages. A disadvantage of a naturalistic observation is that there's a lack of control. The observer has no means of isolating the causes of different behaviors. Now, what might we do to remedy that? Well, I might have a controlled observation or a clinical interview. For instance, this made a little harder than I thought I was going to be. Sorry to keep you. Oh, yes. An example of a controlled observation is the strange situation task, sometimes pluralized to strange situations, where a very young child is deliberately abandoned by the parent in a lab setting to observe the child's reaction upon the parent's return. And thankfully, most children apparently, quote unquote, forgive the parent, but some appear to hold a grudge, if you will. Now, we're talking 15-month-olds. Now, why would they do such a thing? Well, it's not necessarily ecologically valid, but you can discern a pretty strong reaction. So the way it works is the parent leaves unexpectedly for about 3 minutes and leaves the baby with a stranger. Often the child reacts strongly with distress, and then when the parent returns, they observe the baby's apparent forgivingness, if you will, of the parent. Now, if they tend to warm up right away, that's a suggestion of secure attachment. On the other hand, if there's some ambivalence and apparent near rejection from the baby, then you can maybe infer that there's an insecure attachment or a non-secure attachment. So that's one context in which there's a controlled observation.